This presentation is using the qualifying child or relative resource tool. The purpose of this tool is to give tax aid counselors a reliable tool that can give a clear and complete answer to the question of whether someone qualifies as a dependent or not. Tool is used for purposes not just for dependency, but also it has an important role to play in determining whether someone qualifies to be a qualifying person for various other tax benefits, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit. So it's not just dependency that the tool is worthwhile for us to use. This is an image of the first page of the resource tool. And note that the slide indicates that this is an updated resource tool. So this is one that has been around since last tax season. And it is now 8 pages. Originally, it was 3 pages. It has now been converted to 8 pages, so it has a lot more usefulness than it did a year ago. So what are some of the benefits to using this resource tool? Well, first of all, it simplifies the process of identifying qualifying children or relatives, and also greatly simplifies the process of determining filing status for a particular taxpayer. It also identifies tax benefits that can be claimed by the taxpayer. Of course, these are subject to additional requirements that may apply depending on what the benefit is. It eliminates mistakes that otherwise might never be caught. It also includes important definitions and a nice filing status chart as well. Page 1 of the resource tool gives you a little legend that helps you to understand how to use the tool properly. So you have this in this blue box that shown here. Always start with chart 1, box 1, and there are other useful information that'll help you to actually learn how to use it. Here's our first example where we'll actually use the tool to get some questions answered. The child, whose name is John, is self-supporting because he receives Social Security survivor benefits used for his own support. Can he be claimed by his widowed mother with whom he lives? So let us use the resource tool to ask a few questions. So when we start with chart 1, box 1, the question is, was the child a U.S. citizen, national, or resident alien, or a resident of Mexico or Canada during the tax year? So when we ask about John, we find out that John is a U.S. citizen, and so that's a yes, and that prompts us to go to box 4. Box number 4 has the question, was John your son, daughter, stepchild, eligible foster child, brother, sister, half-brother, half-sister, stepbrother, stepsister, or a descendant of any of them? And the answer to that is yes, and that sends us to box number 6. Box 6 contains the question, was John under age 19 at the end of the year? And the answer to that was yes, and that sends us to box 10. And then box 10 has the question, was John younger than you, meaning the mother? So was John younger than his mother? And the answer to that was yes. That sends us to box 13. Box 13 asks the question, except for temporary absences, did John live with you for more than half the year? The answer to that is yes, and that sends us to page 2 of the resource tool, box number 16. Box 16, is John the qualifying child of any other taxpayer? For example, except for temporary absences, did John live with any other close relative? Perhaps a parent, grandparent, etc., aunt, uncle, older sibling, for more than half the year. So was John the qualifying child of any other taxpayer for more than half the year? The answer to this is no, and that sends us to box 25. Box 25, is John a married filing jointly tax return? And you should answer no if filing only to get a refund or to get back withholding or of estimated tax. And the answer to that in this case is no. So that sends us to box 26. And box 26 contains, can you, the taxpayer, or your spouse, if married filing jointly, be claimed as a dependent on any other taxpayer's return? And the answer here also is no, and that sends us to box 29. The question in box 29 wants to know whether John's parents are divorced, legally separated, or lived apart at of all of the last half of the year. Of course, John's dad is deceased, which is why his spouse is claiming qualified widow. So the answer here is no. That sends us to box 34. Box 34. Did John provide more than half of his own support? The answer here is yes, and that sends us to box 36, which is the last box. Box 36 is a blue box, which means that when you get to a blue box, you know you have an answer to your question. So in this case, John is his mother's qualifying child for earned income credit if and only if he is not married. Both you and he have valid Social Security numbers, and you are not the qualifying child of another taxpayer. In other words, his mother is not the qualifying child of another taxpayer. But also note the box down beneath that, no head of household. So she does not qualify for head of household because she has John. She does not qualify for any dependency exemption, which until 2026, there is no dependency exemption. So I guess that's not really a problem. And then she also does not qualify to use the child for child tax credit purposes. So the tool has worked. The tool has given us exactly what relationship John has with his mother for tax purposes. Now that we've used the resource tool to determine what John's relationship is with his mother for tax purposes, and now that we know that she can claim earned income credit using John, so it's obvious that John needs to be on the tax return, but he's not technically a dependent of hers. So we need to go to the dependency section where John should be listed on the tax return. And under John's name, there are a number of questions that you see here on this slide. And the one question that would need to be checked is the one that says check if John is the qualifying child, if is qualifying child, but not your dependent. So he would not be the dependent on the tax return, but he would certainly qualify her for earned income credit. And in order for her to get earned income credit, this box would need to be checked. Example number 2, Hilda, Gertie, and Rolf. Hilda is Gertie's mother and provides housing for all three. Gertie is an adult and Rolf's mother, and both live with Hilda. Gertie pays for their share of the food and all the other costs for herself and Rolf, which comes to more than half of their total support, but not more than half the household costs. Hilda and Gertie both work and are required to file joint returns, although Hilda has more income. Rolf is just 8 years old and has no income. Who can claim Rolf and for which benefits? So the best way to go about this, the best way to start is to start in the middle with Gertie. So if we keep Gertie in mind and we look at chart number 1, Gertie is too old and not a student, so she is not a qualifying child. So that takes care of chart 1. Chart number 2, Gertie's income is too high to be a qualifying relative, so that doesn't work out. So the result is that Hilda cannot claim Gertie for any tax benefits. Let's now look at Rolf as a potential qualifying child of Gertie. Well, if we go to chart 1 for qualifying child, we find that boxes 1, 4, 6, 10, and 13 are all marked yes, which brings us to box 16. You can see box 16 here on this slide. So is Rolf a qualifying child of Hilda? And the answer is yes, because they all live together and Hilda is his grandmother. So in chart 1, box 17, which deals with the possible tiebreaker situation, Gertie would win the tiebreaker because she is the parent, and so she would win over the grandmother. Boxes 19, 25, 26, 29, and 34 are all marked no. So Gertie can claim all of the benefits of box 35, which we're looking at on this slide, the blue box. So the only thing that Gertie cannot claim is head of household. She did not pay more than half the cost of maintaining the home for Rolf. So she cannot claim head of household. So here's a summary of exercise 2 for Hilda, Gertie, and Rolf. Gertie or Hilda could claim Rolf. Hilda only if Gertie lets her. Gertie or Hilda would get the benefits of box 35, but Gertie does not get head of household filing status. So we would need to test for the greatest household benefit. How would the household benefit most? Should Gertie or Hilda claim Rolf? Which provides the greatest refund? So once we do that test, assuming that both Hilda and Gertie are okay with looking for a household benefit rather than looking for an individual benefit, then we could go ahead and do it whichever way comes out financially better. So we need to look at a qualifying child from two different perspectives. We need to look at them potentially as a dependent, but also possibly as a non-dependent, but qualifying the taxpayer for various other tax benefits. So the qualifying child can entitle the taxpayer to benefits even though the child is not a dependent. The tiebreaker rule is used to determine whether the individual is a qualifying child for the taxpayer or perhaps for somebody else. Additional rules apply in order to claim the individual as a dependent. So there are other requirements in some cases. The charts will tell you if a taxpayer is a qualifying child or a qualifying relative for a given tax benefit. And most tax benefits also have other requirements that must be satisfied. And those would be listed on page 5 of the resource tool, 5 and 6 of the resource tool. So you should make yourself aware of everything that's on that resource tool, all 8 pages of it, so that if you do start looking at a particular benefit, you want to make sure that you look at the additional requirements as well. I cannot overemphasize this. You must read the footnotes on pages 3 and 5. This resource tool is absolutely worthless if you were to ignore the footnotes. So the footnotes are as important as the rest of the flowchart. So please, if you see a superscript, a little number, 1, 2, 3, or whatever, follow up, go down to the bottom of the page and look for the footnote and read it carefully. Here's a couple of helpful definitions. What's the difference between disabled and incapable of self-care? Permanently and totally disabled. Now you will hear this as you work at your various sites. You will hear the permanently disabled term thrown about, and it's important to understand what that really means. A person is permanently and totally disabled if both of the following apply. Number 1, he or she cannot engage in any substantial gainful activity because of a physical or mental condition. Number 2, a doctor determines the condition has lasted or can be expected to last continuously for at least 12 months or can lead to death. Now, the term incapable of self-care means something different. It means that the individual is physically or mentally not able to care for oneself. Persons who cannot dress, clean, or feed themselves because of physical or mental problems are considered not able to care for themselves. Also, persons who must have constant attention to prevent them from injuring themselves or others are considered not able to care for themselves. So those are a couple of definitions that should be helpful to you in the course of your volunteer role with Tax-Aide.